Hi, my name is Dahlia Schwartzman, and I'm going to be talking about early adversity and the hidden talents model. So, the topics that I'm going to cover are what is early adversity, the biological response to stress, what the hidden talents model is, examples of these hidden talents in early adversity, the neurobiological changes that occur with early adversity, what is adaptive intelligence and how that impacts how we think about cognitive tests, and the traditional resilience model versus the hidden talents model. So, what is early adversity? According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, examples of early adversity include child abuse and neglect, exposure to violence, and family socioeconomic hardship. These experiences can lead to a toxic stress response. A toxic stress response is a response that occurs when a child experiences a strong, frequent, and prolonged adversity without enough adult support. Early in life is when we're most vulnerable to the effects of stress, which can lead to permanent changes in the developing brain, causing psychological and physiological damage. So, what does stress do to our bodies and our brains? Stress has a profound effect on the hormones in our body and our brain. Stress hormones modulate the neural activity of the brain, specifically in the HPA axis or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis is where the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal gland interact to regulate the body's response to stress. The adrenal glands produce the cortisol, and then the hippocampus regulates this production of cortisol through a negative feedback loop because it has the receptors that are sensitive to it. Early experience epigenetically changes the potentiation of these symptoms. In one study, pups who experienced more licking and grooming from their mother had an increased hippocampal glucocorticoid receptor expression and therefore had a more modest pituitary adrenal response to the stress. This is epigenetically influenced by the binding of a transcription factor called NGFIA to the DNA, which controlled the way that the DNA was transcribed into RNA. In humans, FK506 binding protein 5 diminishes the glucocorticoid sensitivity to cortisol, which predicts a prolonged cortisol response to stress and impaired negative feedback of the HPA axis, which leads to elevated life stress related depression and PTSD. And it was also found that in bullied children, there was also this blunted cortisol secretion response. So there's been a lot of research on the negative biological, psychological, and social implications of early adversity. But these adaptations are also what allowed these people to survive under these harsh and unpredictable conditions. But are all these qualities negative? This is where the hidden talents model comes in. So, what is the hidden talents model? This model proposes that stress adapted skills represent a form of adaptive intelligence that enables individuals to function within the constraints of the harsh and unpredictable environments. Most research done today reinforces the deficit model, which emphasizes the chronic stress of young people, impairs the brain structure and function in the way that undermines mental abilities. This approach is incomplete because it misses all the advantages of the adapted skills associated with going through early adversity. The hidden talents model more accurately paints a well-rounded view of people who have lived through early adversity, and in a way that avoids the negative stigma and focuses on people's strengths. And evolutionarily speaking, this model makes sense because we adapt to the environment as best as we can to increase our chances of survival. So here are some examples of these hidden talents. For example, children who have been maltreated have faster rates at detecting and memorizing patterns of anger. Young adults who grew up in unpredictable home environments show enhanced ability for flexibility switching between tasks or mental sets for tracking novel and environmental information, especially when it's in the environment of stress or uncertainty. And pups that grew up with low maternal care did better in tasks involving a fear response than pups with high maternal care. So essentially, they were better at tolerating stressful activities because they grew up in an environment where they weren't constantly nurtured and they were able to tolerate the heightened cortisol more. There's also been many interesting findings for individuals with low socioeconomic status or SES backgrounds. In general, people with low SES backgrounds pay more attention externally to changes in the environment that they can't control. For example, people with low SES show greater empathetic accuracy, compassion, and attentiveness to others, and they display greater attunement to the people and social informational relationships. They also are better at decoding nonverbal cues. The developmental adaptations may have occurred because people with low SES background are used to being vigilant about external events that they can't control and may preferentially regulate attention towards external and uncontrollable social forces and other individuals who can influence their life outcomes. Additionally, those with socioeconomic disadvantage and crime exposure show enhanced procedural memory, but reduced performance in cognitive function involved in working memory. Children that have grown up in poverty and high crime backgrounds do faster but marginally less accurate in cognitive processing, indicating a shift to more automatic responding, focusing on the speed instead of the accuracy. Neurobiology of early adversity. High levels of acute stress may cause a shift from top-down explicit memory systems, the hippocampal prefrontal dependent memory system, to bottom-up procedural systems like the striatum dependent systems. So, like I said before, children growing up in high crime and poverty areas respond more automatically and do better in tasks involving procedural memory. Bottom-up procedural memory is part of the striatum-dependent system, which involves the basal ganglia. Extensive evidence shows the role of the basal ganglia, in particular the dorsal striatum in learning and memory. One prominent hypothesis is that this brain region mediates a form of learning in which stimulus response associations that happen automatically are acquired, which are important to do things quickly when you grew up in a high early adversity environment. Additionally, several studies have shown that early life stress increases the risk for atypical development of neurobiological circuits that involve the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the striatum, and the hippocampus, although these differences don't necessarily imply deficits in function. Emerging literature suggests that these patterns may still constitute developmental adaptations to stress. Children with early abuse or neglect have enlarged amygdalas and show stress-adapted skills, including faster search times, response bias, and anxiety, and disinhibited social engagement, where the amygdala has an indiscriminate response to parents versus strangers. This serves as a potentially important survival skill by maintaining openness to non-parental adults as caregivers. Early life stress is associated with early maturation of parts of the brain, called the stress accelerated hypothesis. There is earlier structural and functional development of the hippocampus, the amygdala, and connections between the medial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Advantages of this early maturation include faster maturing learning behaviors, stress-adapted decision-making strategies, earlier development of emotional learning regions, and accelerated independence. The trade-off of this early maturation includes later emotional dysregulation and truncated developmental plasticity of the brain. In addition, insensitive caregiving correlated with enlarged hippocampal volumes in infants and better performance on hippocampal-based relational memory tasks. Adaptive intelligence. One definition for intelligence is how well you learn and adapt to your environment. Adaptive intelligence can be understood as one's ability to accomplish tasks that reflect significant challenges within the constraints posed by one's lived environment. Typical cognitive tests require sustained attention, which is likely to be a disadvantage to those living in unpredictable conditions where heightened attention shifting is needed to monitor threats. So they're better at shifting their attention quickly as opposed to focusing on one task for a prolonged period of time. So we're assessing the wrong type of intelligence in these people, not the type that they adapted to. IQ tests reflect the experiences of children, primarily middle class, growing up in a modernized society. So this reflects our own bias towards such communities, even though they don't reflect a certain population in society. To improve learning in stress adapted people, they tend to display deficits in sustaining attention, and we can redesign academic practices to leverage attention shifting skills. Likewise, if stress adapted students display deficits in working memory capacity, we can increase learning by rapidly shifting information and changing the environment to increase memory retention. The traditional resilience model versus the hidden talents model. So, as opposed to the hidden talents model, more traditional resilience models focus on what environment is best for fostering resilience and how we can reverse the negative effects of early adversity. The traditional model asks questions like, can resilience capacity be nurtured in development or boosted in the context of current or impending adversity to promote successful adaptation? The resilience model focuses on interventions in early childhood. This model gauges how normal a person is or how they reflect the values of the dominant culture. This model is flawed in that it almost forgets that those that have gone through early adversity have a fundamentally different experience than the normative and have developed adapted skills and changes in brain function. So instead of targeting change in these stress adapted skills, the hidden talents model seeks to leverage them for positive ends in adolescents and adults. Both models have elements that are important, and we can combine the two depending on where individuals are in their development. Thank you for listening.